As a Seventh-day Adventist, I had a nagging thought for decades, and that was, how do I know Ellen White was a true prophet? I always assumed someone had figured it out, someone smarter, maybe with a doctorate in theology. But as I grew up in the church, this question continued to nag at me. When everything closed down in 2020, I found myself with more time, and once again with this question of her authority. But I had no idea where to begin searching. How do you investigate a prophet to see whether or not they are legitimate? It's a difficult question to ask, especially when Adventism is all I've ever known. Eventually, I made an appointment with an Adventist pastor to discuss this question and to provide reasons that I should have confidence in Ellen White. But I also asked him to give me one book that would show the unfavorable side of Ellen White, because I wanted to see what was written about her that was not approved by the Adventist publishing companies. I felt this was the only way to see a different perspective. He suggested I read The White Lie by Adventist pastor Walter Ray, a book featured in the August 1982 edition of Time magazine. The book documented Ray's research, where he found that Ellen White had copied from various authors and passed them off as her own work. However, before purchasing this book, I felt very conflicted, and I'll admit that this was one of the hardest purchases I have ever made. You may think that's a strange thing to say, but you have to understand, growing up in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, there is a general consensus about questioning Ellen White. People will warn you to be careful about investigating her. They will caution you about being deceived. Even Ellen White warned that there would be those who would lose confidence in her writings and fall away from Bible truth. But even after all of these warnings circled in my head for a while, I couldn't continue to live with this nagging feeling that something was amiss. How can we test if Ellen White is a true prophet, if the only books we read are those that endorse her as a true prophet? How is that consistent with intellectual honesty? The only way we can substantiate that we are not deceived ourselves is to investigate her. I feel it goes to show how sheltered we as Adventists are, that we are not even aware that there are books and resources out there that shed different light on our prophet and beliefs. Or perhaps I didn't look. Perhaps you didn't look. We tell each other that we have the truth after all, and we caution against looking outside of our community for answers. In the beginning of his book, he mentions he was informed that the book Sketches from the Life of Paul by Ellen White, written in 1883, was largely copied from another book on the life of Paul by authors Conybeare and Hawson, all under the guise that the book was inspired by God. This piqued my interest, and I decided to begin my investigation into her validity with this specific book. But at the same time, I asked myself, why would a prophet need to take others' writings? How could this be acceptable? If someone reports they are receiving light from God and that we should take their messages seriously, or we are rejecting God, should it not create suspicion when we see that that individual has taken others' writings and ideas and passed them off as her own under the name of the spirit of prophecy? At the very least, shouldn't we who have been raised in Adventism investigate her? Why is this not common? I have not found any friends or family who have spent any significant amount of time investigating her. Wouldn't we suggest to Mormons to look into Joseph Smith, or the Christian Scientists to test Mary Baker Eddy? But as I began to search, I found that most Adventists believe our prophet is off limits to this type of scrutiny. Why? I suppose it makes sense that because she is our prophet, and because our parents and friends believe in her, that to challenge her is to challenge our very core, which can complicate relationships. But how can we simply turn our head and ignore any evidence that challenges our paradigm as Adventists? It's not sinful to investigate a prophet. In 1 John 4:1 we read, "Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets are gone out into the world." So I ask you, as I have asked myself, have you tested Ellen White? Or have you only read the defenses by the church that then satisfy your own confirmation bias? I'll admit, after I read The White Lie, I could see why I had not heard of it in Sabbath school or the Adventist school system, or even in Adventist graduate school. It is quite eye-opening, and certainly provides a different perspective and raises many questions. Of course, this is not the only book that has been written opposing Ellen White, but I wanted to start my investigation with this book, and specifically the idea of her using others' writings. So in the initial few videos, I will be discussing plagiarism, beginning with that certain infamous but scarce book by Ellen White entitled Sketches from the Life of Paul. I have over 200 examples from this book, which I plan to show on camera, where she copied from other authors without giving credit. My goal is to examine both sides of the issue, so I will also be discussing the Adventist counterarguments. After I have discussed plagiarism, I will be testing Ellen White by her own writings and by the Bible. So if you have had some of these same questions and you would like to study with me, feel free to subscribe or check back and write in the comments below. I welcome any discussion. I'll see you in the next one.